it would be really cool if Robert De Niro came out right now. I regret to tell you, yes, but I can validate that it's very true. Unfortunately, Mr. De Niro is under the weather today. But he did personally dictate this statement. I can attest to it. I can't do his voice, but boy does it sound like Robert De Niro. So this is from him personally. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you today. A few days ago I came down with a heavy case of COVID. I was looking forward to being with you, hearing the other speakers, and speaking with Miles. I first encountered Miles when he was still anonymous. Through his writing, commentary, and books, I've come to admire his intelligence and courage. I'm grateful that he's agreed to be my voice today. Thank you, Bob. I am with you in spirit. I am watching. This is an important conversation. What the New Republic is doing here, this Stop Trump Summit, what you all are doing here today, can help determine our future. I've spent a lot of time studying bad men. I've examined their characteristics, their mannerisms, the utter banality of their cruelty. Yet there's something different about Donald Trump. When I look at him, I don't see a bad man. Truly. I see an evil one. Over the years, I've met gangsters here and there. This guy tries to be one, but he can't quite pull it off. There's such a thing as honor among thieves. Yes, even criminals usually have a sense of right and wrong. Whether they do the right thing or not is a different story. But they have a moral code, however warped. Donald Trump does not. He's a wannabe tough guy with no morals or ethics, no sense of right or wrong, no regard for anyone but himself, not the people he was supposed to lead and protect, not the people he does business with, not the people who follow him blindly and loyally, not even the people who consider themselves his friends. He has contempt for all of them. We New Yorkers got to know him over the years that he poisoned the atmosphere and littered our city with monuments to his ego. We knew firsthand that this was someone who should never be considered for leadership. We tried to warn the world in 2016. The repercussions of his turbulent presidency divided America and rattled New York City beyond imagination. Remember how we were jolted by crisis in early 2020 as a virus swept the world. We lived with Donald Trump's bombastic behavior every day on the national stage, and we suffered as we saw our neighbors piling up in body bags. The man who was supposed to protect this country put it in peril because of his recklessness and impulsiveness. It was like an abusive father ruling the family by fear and violent behavior. That was the consequence of New York's warning getting ignored. Next time, we know it will be worse. Make no mistake, the twice impeached, 4-time indicted Donald Trump is still a fool, but we can't let our fellow Americans write him off like one. Evil thrives in the shadow of dismissive mockery, which is why we must take the danger of Donald Trump very seriously. So today we issue another warning from this place where Abraham Lincoln spoke, right here in the beating heart of New York, to the rest of America. This is our last chance. Democracy won't survive the return of a wannabe dictator, and it won't overcome evil if we are divided. So what do we do about it? I know I'm preaching to the choir here. What we're doing today is valuable, but we have to take today into tomorrow. Take it outside these walls. We have to reach out to half of the country who have ignored the hazards of Trump and for whatever reason, support elevating him back into the White House. They're not stupid, and we must not condemn them for making a stupid choice. Our future doesn't just depend on us. It does depend on them. Let's reach out to Trump's followers with respect. Let's not talk about democracy. Democracy may be our holy grail, but to others, it's just a word, a concept, and their embrace of Trump, they've already turned their backs on it. Let's talk about right and wrong. Let's talk about humanity. Let's talk about kindness, security for our world, safety for our families, decency. Let's welcome them back. We won't get them all, but we can get enough to end the nightmare of Trump and fulfill the mission of this Stop Trump Summit. Thank you.
Donald Trump is back, angry, vengeful, ready to take back the White House and wreck America again. And who's going to stop him? These weaklings and losers, business leaders, they'll bend the knee and write the checks. The press, too many are just here for the show, ready to both sides America to death. The law, he'll ignore it, like he's always done. No, the only people who will stop Trump are Americans ready to put country over party, ready to put differences aside to save this country, ready to work, ready to fight, ready to stand up when he knocks America down. Because it's not about left and right. It's not about rich and poor, black or white. Like it's always been, the choice is simple. It's America or Trump.
You're a piece of shit. You are a traitor.
You're pushing for anti-Trump? You dumb motherfucker. We will squash you like a fucking peanut, bitch. You're dumb. You're dumb. So eat a dick and die.
Miles, we're gonna dox you. You're not gonna be able to walk down the street. You're an anti-American. Leave the country. You're not welcome here anymore. You're anti-American. You hate your country. Get out.
Because you deserve the last hell, and I think you will get what's coming to you. God willing.
Myers Taylor, what the fuck are you thinking, going against Trump, you and your cronies?
I really don't appreciate you putting out garbage. Do you want to be looking at defamation of character, et cetera, putting out lies? Because everybody's on it and on you. Your names are going to go viral because you are treating joke to our country. You are what is wrong with America. You, son, are a piece of shit. And we don't forget true shit. Bob, the public know that your efforts to try and defeat the GOAT, the greatest president of all time, it's not going to work. You guys poked the bear. You woke the sleeping giant. We're coming, my man.
Well, never had an introduction like that. I hope we get to leave them some congratulatory messages after Donald Trump's defeated. What do you think about that? Now, I want to talk to you a little bit today about how those voicemails ended up in my inbox and the moment we are in as a country. Now, some of you know that the reason I was getting those phone calls is I decided to leave the Republican Party and come out against Donald Trump. And I had been criticizing him from the shadows for many years. And he was very excited to be able to come after me. Donald Trump said after I unmasked myself, bad things will happen to him. And he was right. They did. And his supporters made sure of it. After I came forward, they doxed me, they doxed my family members, they pursued me, they hunted me, and on election night 2020, I found myself in a safe house in Northern Virginia, under armed guard, and with a pistol under my pillow because of the threats. That wasn't even the worst part. I, in the course of coming out against Donald Trump, had to flee my home, lost my job, had to use my life savings on lawyers and protectors. protection, lost a lot of friends, and lost my relationship. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was seeing people who had nothing to do with it, my family members, on the receiving end of those threats. Seeing my pregnant sister get messages with photos of her house from MAGA stalkers promising blood would be in the streets. It was at that moment that I didn't want to go on. Now, what's extraordinary about the story I just told you is it's not extraordinary. What's so uncommon about that story is that it is common right now. I always say, no one has to have sympathy for me, but I talk honestly about what happened because it's happening everywhere. This is happening to federal, state, and local officials. And today I want to talk a little bit about how much worse it will be if we make this same civic mistake and put that man back in office. But first, let me take you back in time. Because I didn't always speak this cynically about the moment that we are in. I first came to Washington in the wake of 9/11, and we all remember that moment. Do you remember that moment? Yes.
New York City.
Regardless of how you voted, that was probably the apex of unity in this country. And I went to Washington as a young man after 9/11, and I had the best seat in town. And I mean it, better than the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. I went to the House of Representatives as a congressional page, and we had this desk that none of you have probably ever seen. It sits in the back of the House chamber, the floor of the House of Representatives, with a bird's eye view of the chamber. And as a page, that's the desk I sat at. So I got to watch the members of Congress argue down in the well, then laugh, backslap, and cut deals to keep the country safe. It was a moment of unity, and I will tell you, I was inspired by sitting at that desk. But as Donald Trump worked his way up through the rungs in American politics, my optimism started to burn off like water on hot asphalt. But that's not to say I didn't make any mistakes in that process, because I did. And let me tell you about a few of them. The first mistake I made was thinking he couldn't rise to power. Now, I was working in the House of Representatives at the time. Paul Ryan was Speaker, and I was part of developing something Paul Ryan called the Trump Inoculation Plan. And most of you have never heard of that. Why? Because it failed catastrophically. I remember voting on election day and going home so self-sure that Donald Trump couldn't become president. And we know what happened. We were wrong about the overwhelming influence of populism in American politics. Second big thing that I was wrong about was believing we could contain this man. I didn't want to go into the Trump administration. There were offers to go into the White House. That would have been a dream job for someone like me who'd come up in Republican politics and in the national security community, but that's not where I wanted to be. But then I saw mentors, people like 4-star Marine General John Kelly, people like Jim Mattis going into the administration, and I thought, maybe it won't be so bad. And after several months, I took an offer to go in and to work for John Kelly. And I will not forget what he told me the night before I took that job. He looked me in the eye and he said, "Miles, I want to remind you, you swear an oath to protect this country against enemies foreign and domestic." And I said, "General, yes, I understand. I've sworn the oath." And he said, "No, foreign and domestic." I get chills every time I say that, because he was sending me a very clear message that he, a member of the president's own cabinet, viewed his boss as a threat to the United States because of what he had seen. And when I came into the administration, I realized it wasn't nearly as bad as it looked from the outside. It was so much worse. And in that first year, again, in the vein of mistakes, I was very self-sure we were playing whack-a-mole to put the bad ideas back in the box. Whether it was a phone call from Trump saying we should pull out of NATO, to a phone call from Trump saying we should collaborate with Vladimir Putin on cybersecurity. True story, he wanted us to form a, quote, impenetrable cyber unit with Vladimir Putin.
Wow.
It's like asking the serial killer to go investigate the murder that he just committed. That's what he wanted to do with Putin. All the way to truly terrifying things. His desire to gas, electrify, and shoot innocent migrants at the U.S. southern border. These were horrific things to hear as a lifetime public servant. And that's when I realized our second mistake was a mistake, is when saying no was no longer enough, is when those bad ideas didn't stay in the box. Which leads me to my third mistake, which was thinking that just shining a light on the man would deter him from bad behavior. Now, some of you know I grew frustrated from within the administration. I wrote an anonymous opinion piece in the New York Times. Now, a lot of MAGA folks like to jeer about that. I wasn't afraid to come forward in my own name. I'm speaking in front of you today. But I knew that depriving Trump of my identity would force him to grapple with the truth instead of wrestling with the messenger, which is what he loves to do to distract attention. And I was confident that shining that light would have an impact. And so I told the American people publicly what Trump's cabinet was saying privately, which is that they thought he was dangerously unhinged and that they had considered invoking the 25th Amendment to remove him from office if it got worse. That, I felt like, meant it was time to come forward. That meant I could violate this promise to protect secrets from within the administration, is the moment at which Trump's own cabinet felt like he wasn't stable enough for the job. But that didn't do what I had hoped it would do. Because as I later found out, from Stephanie Grisham of all people, who had been Donald Trump's press secretary and comms director, that anonymous opinion piece and a book I wrote called A Warning drove him crazy. And he systematically identified and fired the cabinet members and advisors who he thought were working against him as part of a deep state. It backfired. That left one option. That option was to get my ass out there, unmask myself, and recruit as many people as humanly possible to quit that administration and oppose his reelection. I am proud to say that it ended up being the largest group of ex-officials in American history to turn against a president who had appointed them. And I hope it had an impact, but if it did, it was just barely. And here's what worries me today, and here's why I want to talk to you today, is I've spent the past 2 years going back and speaking to as many people as I possibly can from inside the Trump administration. Trust me, that was a pride-swallowing siege, and I don't wish it upon any of you. But I sat down with those people, cabinet members, all the way down to staff assistants that sat at the desk outside the Oval Office, to ask them one question. What did Donald Trump want to do in his second term that he was unable to? And what would he do if he gets reelected? The answers shocked even me, and I'll quickly give you 3 things based on those conversations over 2 years that I think we should expect. Number 1, this so-called axis of adults will not be there. Trump will have a cabinet of sycophants, and what's more worrying is that people around him predict he will circumvent the U.S. Senate altogether. Imagine a Stephen Miller as Secretary of Homeland Security, but without the advice and consent of the Senate. Not possible, you say. The Senate will assert itself. How? The Senate will enforce its power. How? It will not. And I'll give you one example. The last 18 months of the Trump administration, your Secretary of Homeland Security, a man named Chad Wolf, was illegally, according to a federal judge, in that position. Do you know what the consequences were? There weren't consequences. He ended up quietly resigning when it was clear that they weren't going to win that legal fight. Donald Trump has learned a lesson from that. He can put whoever he wants in the cabinet in a second term. Congress be damned. This will happen at other levels of government as well. We will expect the top political appointees that work under those people to be, in Steve Bannon's words, a rising generation of assassins. That is how they describe the people who would be appointed to be your civil servants running your government, assassins. And their first target will be the civil servants who are supposed to grant government decision-making without fear or favor. You've heard about Schedule F. You've heard about this intention to gut the civil service. It is vastly more expansive than most people realize. They are putting a lot of time and a lot of legal effort into giving Donald Trump in a second term the levers not just to gut the federal government, but to replace those civil servants with MAGA hardliners. That's not how government's supposed to operate. Second thing I worry about, I worry that the guardrails of democracy will instead be used as weapons. Time and time again in these conversations, people told me about how the agencies they worked in had plans to use their powers for political purposes to benefit Donald Trump, and they only avoided it because he wanted to win re-election. We see that with the Justice Department. People told me about Trump's plans to appoint special counsels to go after his enemies, to prosecute his rivals. Impossible, you say. No. Trump knows this well. In fact, he's talked about it now on the campaign trail, about how he intends to appoint special counsels to go for his adversaries. And I will never forget a meeting that we had in the Oval Office with him where he actually lectured us about this. He said, I learned one thing in business, and that is when you threaten to sue people, they go, pfft. And he waved his hand. And he said, but when you actually sue them, whether you have a case or not, they squeal and they settle. That's how he will use the U.S. Department of Justice. And that's how he will use other levers of government. One other example would be the intelligence community. Time and time again, intelligence officials who were hand-appointed by Donald Trump told me of their fear in the second term of him weaponizing the powers of the intelligence community to spy on political rivals. This is Richard Nixon on something stronger than steroids. Richard Nixon on fentanyl. Because we've never seen an American president do something quite like that. One intelligence official said to me, Miles, it will be, quote, a revenge machine. And I know this to be true, because when I was in the administration, Donald Trump inquired about wiretapping his own staff because he didn't want them to leak. And at one point he suggested to us we could just ignore wiretapping laws altogether. Mark my words, he will do it in a second term if we put him back in office. I also worry about the weaponization of the domestic security agencies. As Chief of Staff at the Department of Homeland Security, I know how dangerous that could be. I want to give you one example that many of you probably haven't heard about, which was there was a period in the Trump administration when he considered creating his own mercenary force, like the Wagner Group in Russia. This is not a joke. There were very real conversations at the National Security Council level about creating a mercenary group that would be accountable to Trump and outside the chain of command. It came up multiple times. And as I was interviewing officials, one said, yeah, after you left, it came up again. And we frantically had to dissuade the president from going down this route. Make no mistake, he will do that in a second term. Another top official warned that in a second term, Trump would deploy not just the US military, but DHS security forces to ballot places to monitor the polls in midterm and other elections. Sound crazy? We saw this in the midterms. We saw it in Arizona with armed ballot watchers going to the polls with the intention of intimidating voters to keep them from voting, and it's clear who they were targeting. I could go on and on, but I want to end with the third biggest concern I have after those conversations. And that's the level of political intimidation and violence that we are seeing in this country and that we will see if Donald Trump is back in the White House. And it's not just me. A lot of people, like I said, have experienced this. And I want to ask you all a question, a quiz question. In 2015, the year before Donald Trump became president, there were 926 threats to judges in the United States. By what percentage, 5, 10%, do you think that increased by the time Donald Trump left office?
100%.
It increased about 400%. That's no accident. Let's go to members of Congress. When Donald Trump became president, the year he became president, took office, there was about 1,000 death threats to members of Congress. What do you think that number was when Donald Trump left office? 5,000? 2,000? It was 10,000. It was 10,000. Tenfold increase in threats to members of Congress. We see the same thing when we look at local officials, 81% of whom this year said they've dealt with threats in their jobs. 81% of local officials. We see the same thing with poll workers. A third of election security workers have had threats leveled against them. Again, I could go on and on. As a national security professional, one of the things that worries me the most are two words: civil war. We have seen a dramatic spike in chatter about civil war, so much so that the concept has been mainstreamed. 65% of Southern Republicans in this country say they want to secede from the Union. Pretty sure that's a Gallup. 65%. Well, it's not that easy. We're in a dark time. How do we get out of it? I want to read you a message after this from someone who maybe has a more hopeful perspective. But I'm just going to say this. Raise your hand if you've taken econ. I know that's a boring question. Who's taken econ? You've taken econ. One thing you remember from econ is supply and demand curves. And right now, what I want to tell you is the only way to address this crisis we are in is we've got to get more people to dissent, especially in the Republican Party. More people who know what's going on is wrong, and if they would speak up, they could tip the balance in favor of the pro-democracy side and keep it that way. But the price of dissent is very high in this country. I know it firsthand. The price of speaking out is enormous. So, Econ 101. There are only two ways to lower the price of something in a marketplace if it's too high. You either decrease the demand. When the demand for something goes down, the price goes down. Well, we don't want to decrease demand for dissent. So what's the only other way?
Increase supply.
You increase the supply. The only way the price of dissent goes down in this country is if more people do it, if it's on the store shelves, if we are out there speaking the truth, and that's what we need to do. I will close by saying this. I will not forget on January 6th how close it was to being worse. There were people with zip ties on their belts who were ready to capture and tie up members of Congress and God knows what else. And that night I saw a picture I will never forget. And you remember this picture. Armed Capitol Secret Service agents on the House floor pointing their guns at the door. What you probably don't remember is that door was barricaded by a desk. That was the same desk I served in as a congressional page. They had gone to the corner of the chamber, moved that desk that inspired generations of young public servants into the door, and it was the last line of defense protecting America's citadel of democracy from insurrectionists. Was that same desk. That's not how it should be. The last line of defense should not be a piece of plywood. It's you. You are that last line of defense in this fight. And my ask and my hope is that the next time the barbarians are at the gate, it is all of us pushing back. Thank you.